All right, today we are going to pick up where we left off. We were talking about Abraham Lincoln's position on Reconstruction, on emancipation, on all of that. So today, I really wanted to focus on Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction, and then we will go into what happened, because obviously, Lincoln got assassinated, things changed. So, I wanted to pick up this video where we left off because it does a good job of describing how historians think about this. Yeah.
What changed Lincoln's mind about slavery was the war itself. It was the summer of 1862, and the war was going badly. The Confederate Army had defeated superior Northern forces or fought them to a standstill. Lincoln knew he needed what we might today call a game changer, a bold stroke to alter the course of the war. Abolishing slavery would strike at the heart of the Southern economy and cripple its forces.
Slavery was the biggest resource the South had. The largest financial asset.
That's important, guys. Remember that. Biggest resources they have, the largest financial assets.
Of their economy, and that is the only way we can win.
No, I'm not saying. The first thing out of his mind and his mouth might indeed be the basic fact: I can't win this war without destroying slavery. That doesn't mean he wouldn't also go on and say, we're doing the right thing.
David Blaine and I toured the Soldiers' Home in Washington, D.C. It was here, at his summer cottage, that Lincoln worked on his famous Emancipation Proclamation.
Lincoln spent endless sleepless nights. He weighed over and over and over the form it would take, how to do it, the timing of it. He genuinely feared, as did members of his cabinet who cautioned him not to do it, that if he issued an executive order freeing the slaves, it transformed the purpose of the war, transformed the meaning of the war. The fear, of course, was that thousands of white Union soldiers might just throw down their arms and go home.
Casting aside his fears, Lincoln decided to issue an executive order to end slavery. On January 1st, 1863, in cities and towns all across the North, there was a great sense of anticipation. Lincoln signed the final proclamation with a steady hand. I never in my life felt more certain that I was doing right, he said, than I do in signing this paper. If my name ever goes into history, it will be for this act, and my whole soul is in it.
That's a man who's grown. Now, history made him. History dragged him to do what he did. But he did.
When word finally came that Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation, there was wild celebration. Many people shed tears of joy for a day they thought would never arrive. But few who rejoiced that day fully understood the delicate political calculus in which Lincoln had engaged. To keep the border states from leaving the Union and to remain within the president's authority under the Constitution, Lincoln had limited the proclamation to the rebellious Confederate states.
That's important.
Why did not Abraham Lincoln free slaves? Over which
Free the slaves. He just said the rebelling states.
He is doing all he has the constitutional power to do. That is, he doesn't have the constitutional power to take the property of law-abiding Americans. He has the constitutional power to take the property of those Americans who are not law-abiding. And how do you decide which person harbors loyal sympathies within a rebellious territory? He's on very dangerous ground. He knows that.
He is unenforceable.
Totally. I think Lincoln believes from the very beginning that the Emancipation Proclamation will not stand in court.
That's why it's such a legal battle.
And the fact is, no
gave their own meaning to the Emancipation Proclamation. As Frederick Douglass famously said, on the night of emancipation, it was not logic we were looking for, it was the trump of Jubilee.
Okay, so that's kind of the mentality of the Emancipation Proclamation. It's a legal document. It is really unenforceable. So, I mean, you can't, these groups of people in open rebellion are not just gonna say, oh yeah, the president did this, so I'm just gonna free my slaves. No. This is the largest financial asset the slaves have, the South has, right? So it's not gonna be something that's easy for them to give up. So emancipation is forced on basically forced on a lot of these southern states. And when it goes, the economy does go with it, okay? So Lincoln, when the Emancipation Proclamation comes out, he is seen as this great emancipator. Now, as the video showed, the truth is a lot more complicated than what the story is, right? So, January 1st, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation took effect across all states in open rebellion to the South. The first place that it was actually read in the United States was Beaufort, South Carolina, under a tree, which still stands, by the way, called the Emancipation Oak. The flag was given to these guys, and somebody sang "My Country 'Tis of Thee," and one of the colonels there said it sounded like the voice of somebody at last unloosed from the bonds of slavery. So it was an emotional moment for the people who saw it, but there's a lot of very intricate political calculus going on. And, you know, it officially, you know, frees all the slaves in open rebellion to the United States. If your master was in open rebellion, you were free under the Emancipation Proclamation. However, in practice, it didn't extend that. It only extended the parts of the states that were occupied by the Union. Okay? It also excluded some slaves. So there were still estimated 450,000 slaves in Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, and Missouri. Now, what was the significance? For those of you who don't remember, maybe you do, maybe you don't. What was the significance of Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, and Missouri? Those were 4 states that had a unique position during the Civil War. What was that? You guys might remember?
They like the first
So, yeah, it wasn't the capital, and so these were slave states that never actually rebelled against the Union. So these are states where slaves are there, but they didn't actually secede. So therefore, Lincoln does not have the authority to free them. Remember, what the historian said, the Emancipation Proclamation did not grant Lincoln the unconstitutional ability to just take property away from Americans. It only granted the opportunity to take property away from people who were in open rebellion to the United States. So for 450,000 slaves in Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, and Missouri, it did nothing. This is why we needed the 13th Amendment. We're building up to that, okay? Now, again, this is ambiguous. Lincoln did not see it like we do today. Lincoln didn't see it as some big, great, moral thing that we've now overcome, and now, we did that maybe later on, but not at first. We see it today as the writing of a great moral injustice. Lincoln saw it as a wartime necessity. Slaves were being used to build and supply the South with labor. Without slaves, the South can't have labor. Again, logistics makes armies available to win. It gives them the ability to win. So without logistical labor, the South cannot complete that task. So here's a quote which kind of just sums up Lincoln's opinion of what's going on with this. So he shared many of the racial prejudices of the time and accepted without dissent the racial discrimination so widespread in both sections. But Frederick Douglass, who had encountered racism even within abolitionist ranks, considered Lincoln a fundamentally decent individual. And this is a quote from Frederick Douglass. "He treated me as a man." Douglass remarked in 1864, He did not let me feel for a moment that there was any difference between the color of our skins. So even though he does share some of the racial prejudices of the period, he saw Douglas as a man, and Douglas, appreciated that. And in fact, the two became friends. In the aftermath of the Emancipation Proclamation, word spread around the South thanks to groups of African Americans. There was one group out in Mississippi called Lincoln's Loyal League that just, they could read, so they read the Emancipation Proclamation. They spread word across the mostly illiterate slave population in Mississippi. They only organized, so this league here only organized to spread word of the Emancipation Proclamation. All right, so word is getting out in the South. Now, in Union-occupied areas in the South, runaways and refugees poured in to these areas. Places like New Orleans, places like Beaufort, South Carolina, Nashville. People were pouring in these. Refugees by the thousands were pouring into all these areas. This is great because they're starving the South of a vital resource. But then becomes the problem, what do we do with these people? That's when we talked about the free labor thing. All these labor experiments that were going on all over the South. But also, you had ready, willing, and able people to fight in the armies. Eric Foner, historian who wrote Reconstruction, America's Unfinished Revolution, basically it's the Bible on Reconstruction right now, talks about, it says by the war's end, some 180,000 blacks had served in the Union Army, over 1/5 of the nation's adult male population under the age of 45. Black soldiers played a crucial role not only in winning the Civil War, but in defining the war's consequences. And it's that last part that I want to focus on. Many of these contraband of war found themselves in the Army, serving logistical roles at first, but after 1863, after the Emancipation Proclamation, they began serving combat roles. Now, the Army provided a great opportunity for African Americans to serve. First of all, it allowed them to, serve in the Army, which to them was a step towards citizenship. It was a big deal to be a part of the Army. The Army also offered them opportunities for education. Okay, remember I said last class, reading and literacy was a very important thing for African Americans. That a lot of people are gonna learn literacy in the Army. And in fact, here's a quote from Foner again. It was in the Army that such large numbers of former slaves first learned to read and write. Either from teachers employed by Northern societies or in classroom and literacy clubs established and funded by the soldiers themselves. For black soldiers, military service meant more than an opportunity to help serve the Union, more even than their freedom, and the destruction of slavery as an institution. For men of talent and ambition, the Army flung open the door for advancement and respectability. So this is a precursor to not just ending the Civil War, ending slavery, but also this is a step towards citizenship. Education means they have the ability to fight for themselves on a legal basis and to know the rules, to level the playing field. So education and literacy is something that's absolutely essential for these people. And there are a lot of men that are pushing this. Prince Rivers is one of the more famous guys. I'm going to talk about him because he later becomes an elected official in South Carolina. Stephen Sawalis, Robert Smalls, the longest serving African American congressman from South Carolina. Still the longest serving African American congressman in congressional history. Learns how to be a citizen, learns how to advocate for himself on a legal basis while in the Army during the Civil War. All right. In 1864, a meeting in Beaufort, which was actually brought together by Robert Smalls and Prince Rivers, to the Republican National Convention. Both men went on to successful political careers during Reconstruction. So both Prince Rivers, again, you're going to hear those names again. Prince Rivers, Robert Smalls. Now, the federal government Reconstruction policy takes a little bit of a different flavor. So the first thing the Union Army did when the war while the war was still going on, is actually figured out what African Americans want from freedom. So what do what is your definition of what freedom means? So Lincoln established a commission in March of 1863 through Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. He established the American Freedmen's Inquiry. And this was basically a special commission that the president delegated to the War Secretary to investigate what freedom meant to African Americans. They went around polling various groups of people. Now, in a report filed later that year, the investigators concluded, quote, "The chief object of ambition among the refugees is to own property, especially to possess land, if it be only a few acres." Okay, land is a priority for people. That's the definition of freedom for African Americans. The other thing, they place a high value both on education for their children and religious instruction for themselves. Okay? Land and education. That's the definition of freedom for people who are freed from slavery. Okay? Land, I'll write these on the board. Land and education. You know, today we take school for granted, but it's meant a lot to a lot of people throughout history. Land and education are the things that are absolute musts. Now, this led to something called the Freedmen's Bureau in 1865. And this is going to be a big deal thing. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. So remember that word, Freedmen's Bureau. Now, Lincoln had, out of all this, Lincoln created a basic idea for Reconstruction that he wanted to put into place. So on December 8th, 1863, Lincoln issued his first piece of legislation that connected to Reconstruction. That first piece of legislation was called the Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction. Okay? This offered a full pardon and a restoration of rights with the exception of slaves. So you could get everything you had before the war with the exception of your slaves. To anybody who took an oath of future loyalty and accepted the abolition of slavery. All right, now, looking at this document, looking at the definition for this thing, would you think it is it confrontational? Is it something that Lincoln is trying to force on people, or is he being accepting? Is it accepting, or is it vengeful? Is it vengeful? Or is he trying to make them pay, or is he trying to just restore? He's trying to restore. Okay. Lincoln did not believe that the South had legally succeeded. Lincoln did not, he said, that this is not something that you can legally do. Because it's not something that you can legally do, we shouldn't be creating all of this, revengeful, vengeance-driven legislation to bring people back in, because they haven't actually broken away, not legally. This is just a rebellion, it's not an actual war. So, now, there were exceptions to this. The legislation did exclude Confederate military and high civil officials. So if you were a Confederate general, you had to go through other hoops. But if you were just a regular run-of-the-mill person, a plantation owner who just, lived at home throughout the war, you took an oath of future loyalty, then you could get everything you had back. All right? So that's how you personally got back. Now, states, a state could be readmitted to the Union with 10% of the votes for each state cast in 1860. So if 10% of the people who had cast votes in 1860 for president had decided that they're going to take this oath of future loyalty, then the state would be readmitted back into the Union. 10% of the population, of the number of votes cast in 1860. All right, state, so this is called the 10% plan. And this is Lincoln's main piece of Reconstruction legislation before his assassination. All right, so the construction of the state, Constitution of the state, when states are readmitted, the Constitution of the state must abolish slavery, okay, and provide education for African Americans. But did allow for racial restrictions for the jobless and homeless, okay? So there were certain restrictions that were put into place that a lot of people, especially in Congress, didn't really like. They thought it was too lenient. Such as this, right, this bottom part right here. But if 10% of the people that voted in the 1860 election take that oath of loyalty, then, and you wrote a constitution that abolishes slavery, provides education for African Americans, then you would be readmitted under Lincoln's plan, this 10% plan. Now, congressional representation would be an issue for Congress. Who represents this state in Congress after that? Well, that's not my problem. That's Congress issue. So they can decide who they think should be the representative. Okay, so like I said, this is called the 10% plan. The 10% plan was something that Lincoln saw as imperfect, but again, he said this is, secession was not legal. Because secession was not legal, we don't need to talk about readmittance because they never left in the first place. So it provided allies, according to Lincoln, in the rebelled states in which he could start Reconstruction with. He wanted to make friends. He wanted to reach across the divide, build bridges. He didn't want to make people suffer any more than they already had. Keep in mind, I'll show you some pictures about this later, but the South economically is devastated after the Civil War. Okay? People don't have clothes. They don't have food. Their largest financial asset, slavery, is been taken away and it's not going to be returned. Lincoln said, you've suffered enough. But to some people, especially in Congress, that was not enough. So in response, yes, ma'am. Go ahead. In response to Lincoln's 10% plan, two senators authored, or a senator and a congressman authored something called the Wade-Davis Bill. The Wade-Davis Bill was something that was a lot more strict, I should say. So there was a whole faction of what we would call today liberal congressmen. Okay? Keep in mind, the liberals during this time period are the Republicans. So this group of liberal congressmen are called radical Republicans that opposed Lincoln's policy. They thought it was way too lenient. Just 10% of people, way too lenient. Not enough. So in January 6, 1864, radical Republican Congressman, Senator Benjamin Wade of Ohio, right here, and Senator Henry Winter Davis, right here, Representative Henry Winter Davis, right here, co-sponsored something called the Wade-Davis Bill. Now, the Wade-Davis Bill was in some ways a lot like Lincoln's 10% plan. It called for the abolition of slavery, for example. But instead of 10%, the Wade-Davis Bill said it has to be 50%. Half of the voters of the state must give this oath of allegiance. It's a lot harder to do. It's a lot stricter. Anyone who opposed abolition would be fined and imprisoned, depending on how much you opposed it. All right? According to the Wade-Davis Bill, citizenship would be stripped from all Confederate office holders in state governments. So if you held office, even if it was like the sheriff or the postmaster general, whatever, in any state in the Confederacy, you were stripped of your citizenship. Even if you're the mayor of a Confederate town, you were stripped of your citizenship. Did not matter. Now, state would be stripped, citizenship would be stripped from all Confederate office holders, and state governments would only be recognized. And state governments would only be recognized by the assent of the president and the approval of Congress. So if you wanted your state to be readmitted, you have to have that 50% pledge. On top of that, the president had to sign off on your state being readmitted. And so did Congress. All right, predominantly radical Republican in 1865. Good luck. This bill passed the House. We have a radical Republican majority in 1865. The bill passes the House 73 to 59. And it passes the Senate 18 to 14. So it passes both the House and the Senate. It goes to Lincoln's desk to be signed into law. Lincoln vetoes it. So Lincoln vetoed the bill. It kept it from becoming law. Lincoln opposed this bill because he refused to back one bill over other options so early in the Reconstruction process. Lincoln was still trying to play the long game. It wasn't about short-term revenge for the Civil War. That was a hot-button issue. A lot of people wanted revenge for all of the death, all of the suffering. But Lincoln was trying to play the long game, which honestly is pretty smart given the situation. So he said, I'm not going to back one bill in particular right off the bat. I'm going to let things play their course and see what happens. So he also wanted the Union repaired as fast as possible. He wanted the Civil War behind him. Now that that's over, let's put it behind us. Let's move on. All right. So in order to move on, we need to readmit everybody to the Union. In addition, Lincoln believed that there was no need to rejoin, again, because secession was unconstitutional and illegal in the first place. You cannot secede from the Union. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you can, so it's not legal, right? So Lincoln said, what is this about rejoining? We don't need to be rejoining. We never left in the first place. All right? Now, on top of this, so we have a little bit of stuff happening with the presidency, Lincoln's 10% plan. Congress passes the Wade-Davis bill, which is very different. Well, the Army does something else. General Sherman, in 1865, at the end of the war, is now starting to they're occupying most of the South. Sherman, after the war ends, goes back to the Sea Islands, South Carolina, and on their way, while the war is still going on their way from Savannah up to Virginia, he dispatches one of his most famous, well-known orders that he ever dispatches. It's called Special Field Order 15. Special Field Order 15. I think I've got the full transcript in the classroom, so if you want to look over that, it's not too long. But in it, he designated all of the abandoned plantation lands in the South as land that was going to be divided up for African Americans. So in it, he designated abandoned plantation lands in South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida for African American settlement after the Civil War. All of these open plantation lands, thousands of acres worth of land on the coasts of South Carolina, Florida, and Georgia, is going to be divided up in 40-acre plots for African Americans. Because they want land. Remember, land is an aspect of freedom. He's going to give it to them. He wants to. This provided the need for African Americans to possess and cultivate their own land, which again, back to land education, that's a key necessity for them to be considered equal in their eyes. Now, there were hundreds of locations that were put in all over the South, set up all over the South to establish this, to help with this transition from slavery to freedom. In response to the American Freedmen's Inquiry, so we have in Lincoln's time, we have Lincoln saying, "Oh, we have this 10% plan. That's going to be a very lenient way to go." Congress says, well, here's a plan to reinvent the Union, but it's far more strict. And Sherman is saying, well, let's just give some of this taken land to African Americans. Okay? None of these plans are going to fix and solve all of the problems that the Civil War created. Lincoln, think about it. Lincoln wants to give the land back to all the plantation owners, but Sherman has promised the same land to African Americans. Is that going to create a conflict? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Right? So, there's some issues and ambiguities here. Now, in response to the American Freedmen's Inquiry, Lincoln establishes something, or Stanton establishes something called the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. Colloquially, in a nutshell, this is called the Freedmen's Bureau. Okay? And this was established as a organization under the War Department after the Civil War. Now the Bureau, following Special Field Orders 15, was authorized to divide all of that land up. And they're the ones who divided it into 40-acre plots for eventual sale to freed slaves and loyal citizens. So they're initially established to manage these land sales to freed slaves. And later on, I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit, but later on they also become involved in helping African Americans register to vote and help with the early on elections during Reconstruction. Now, obviously I hinted at conflict, right? You have Lincoln saying, hey, you can have your land back as long as you take an oath of loyalty. Sherman is saying, I'm going to give this land away. So, the establishment of the Freedmen's Bureau kind of signals that Special Field Orders 15 is going to take precedent, especially in the coast of the South here. So there is a lot of resistance. There is a lot of resistance early on, a ton of resistance early on, and this leads to violence. Okay, this is a hard part of history because a lot of political violence happens during this time. So, initially these struggles over, well, it's my land, no, it's my land, all of that, lead to people being attacked, people being assaulted, sometimes people being killed. Not a pretty period of history. So here's a short video on Special Field Order 15, just to give you guys an idea of what that entails and how it's received. And I think Parker's right, it hits some of the issues too.
But Washington still had no clear plan for what to do once African Americans were free. On January 11th, President Lincoln sent his Secretary of War, Edwin M. Stanton, to Savannah. Stanton instructed General Sherman to set up a meeting with some of the city's black ministers. He wanted to hear how the freedmen imagined their future in the South. That evening, 20 black men entered the grand parlor as guests of Stanton and Sherman. 16 were former slaves. They chose Reverend Garrison Frazier, who had purchased his freedom 9 years earlier, to be their spokesman. For the first time, federal officials conferred with freed slaves about the future of African Americans in the South.
The exchange that occurs between Sherman, Stanton, and the Union generals and Reverend Frazier is one of the extraordinary moments of the Civil War and the ending of the Civil War. Because they asked Frazier not just what should we do with all these refugees, they asked him questions about what the war meant. They asked him questions about what the Emancipation Proclamation had meant. They asked him what the presence of black troops in the Union Army meant. And in many ways, you'll find no better definition of the meaning of the Civil War and the kinds of answers that Garrison Frazier gives that day in Savannah. The way we can best take care of ourselves is to have land. And we can soon maintain ourselves and have something to spare. We want to be placed on land until we're able to buy it and make it our own.
This was a man who never left probably coastal Georgia in his life. And he understood the Declaration of Independence. He understood the Emancipation Proclamation. And beyond that, he said, in effect, you should give us our rights. And you should protect our rights. And then you should leave us alone and let us be citizens.
4 days later, anxious to get thousands of freed slaves off his hands and Washington off his back, General Sherman issued Special Field Order 15. It was only a temporary order, but it became one of the most controversial of the Civil War. Plantations in the rice country had been abandoned by white planters during the war. 400,000 of these acres would be given over to African Americans for settlement. The huge land tract included the Sea Islands and parts of the Georgia and South Carolina coast.
40 acres of land will be given out to each family. Plus, Sherman says the Army's got tons
By the
of
way, that's story.
mules, which we don't really need. They're broken down from our long march. If anyone wants a mule, they can have one of these mules. This is the origin of that famous phrase, 40 acres and a mule.
Here was a real revolution. A revolution in the land, on the land, a chance to be their own freehold.
For 4 million African Americans in the South, news of 40 acres and a mule spread as fast as the contagion of freedom itself. Many saw this as proof that emancipation would finally give black men and women a true stake in the land they had toiled on for centuries.
By the way, the phrase 40 acres and a mule is an important one in American history. So it is going to be important to know where that came from. Yeah. Now that leaves us with the 13th Amendment. Remember, the Emancipation Proclamation has not freed anyone yet. It has said, okay, temporarily, people, slaves who have masters who are in open rebellion in the South are free. But it wasn't, it wasn't a full-time freedom. He didn't free the slaves. The objective was to take slaves away from the people who were using them in the rebellion. Okay? The 13th Amendment is the thing that actually frees the slaves. So at the end of January 1865, the Civil War is still going on. A new amendment to the Constitution passed Congress and headed to the states for ratification. This is in 1860, so this is while the war is still going on. They're starting with the 13th Amendment. Now, 13th Amendment states this: neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to its jurisdiction. So basically, if you have not committed a crime, slavery is not legal anymore. By January, 18 states ratified the 13th Amendment. Even with Southern states dragging their toes, most Southern states did drag their toes on ratification of the 13th Amendment. It did pass in December and became officially an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So December of 1865, just after the Civil War ends, a couple months after, the 13th Amendment is ratified. Slavery is now illegal. Again, except if you're convicted for a crime, slavery is now illegal in the United States as of December of 1865. The last state to ratify the amendment was Mississippi. Might care to guess when Mississippi ratified the 13th Amendment? Everybody else had ratified in 1865. When did Mississippi ratify?
18.
2013.
Oh, wow.
They were still slaves.
No, it's illegal. It's part of the Constitution. Mississippi didn't ratify it until 2013. Mississippi was the last state to ratify the 13th Amendment.
Oh my gosh.
Were they just trying to prove a point or something?
I don't know. I guess, there comes a point where, it's part of the Constitution, so why bother?
Yeah.
But, other states did later on. You're like, yeah, we should.
Were they just like,
Mississippi was kind of the last one to do it. So, with that being said, we're going to pick up, so that kind of leads right up to Lincoln's assassination. This is kind of the state of what's going on when Lincoln is assassinated. And we're going to zoom in on that next class. That's tomorrow's class. But this was essentially the discussion of Reconstruction as it appeared before the war. Now, I've got an activity that I want you guys to do just to familiarize yourself with some sources and some ways to look them up. So on Classroom, everybody has a page, a link on Classroom to, on the Reconstruction page, you scroll down here, the very top, says the Freedmen's Bureau Records Database. Click on that link, it will take you to a database on records for the Freedmen's Bureau.
Hi.
Click on that. Now what this does is it's a search portal for the records provided through the Smithsonian Museum of American History. It's a search portal for records pertaining to Reconstruction. What I want you guys to do, familiarize yourself with this database. Just play with it a little bit. Browse through it, okay? You can click, if you don't know, obviously we don't know anybody's name, but if you have a particular thing that you're curious about, say you're curious about land grants, you can type in quotation marks, LAND space GRANTS, quotation marks. If you put it between quotation marks, it's going to search that entire phrase, all right? So if you click land grants and hit text search, it will pull up everything that references land grants. So there you go. And it's got digitized records. So I want you guys, so if you don't know what to search for, you can just click a location. Say South Carolina, or maybe even North Carolina, if you're interested. Hit that, it will pull up everything from South Carolina. Okay? So, I want you guys to just play with this database a little bit. Look around, find some sources that you are interested in, you're curious about, read through them. And I want you, as you're reading through them, I want you to answer some questions. First of all, read through, figure out who created this document. Was it an individual? Was it a group? Was it a bureau officer? Who was it that created the document? What was the purpose of this document? Question 3, what does this document reveal about the daily lives and struggles of freed people? Question 4, what does it suggest about the successes and limitations of the Freedmen's Bureau? So take some time, browse through the database, find something interesting, find something that you have more questions about, read through it, and work on answering those questions. If you have any questions, you can come to me.